I was born in Columbus, Ohio, raised everywhere. My parents moved a lot. So I've lived from Wisconsin, Tennessee, mostly in Ohio, um, around many different areas of Ohio. In fact, we moved so much that I was in 3 different schools the first semester of my 7th grade year.
Ooh.
So yeah, yeah. So we moved around a lot. So as far as I graduated from a little high school in Amanda, Ohio, called Amanda Clear Creek, and I got there my junior year and graduated, of course, my senior year. So, so that was yeah. I learned how to make friends because we moved around so much. You
Yeah,
know,
you'd have to. Were your parents in the military? Why did you move so much?
no, they were in the military. My dad, he how should I say? I've never heard of saying that the grass is greener on the other side. He always thought the
Oh,
grass was greener
yeah.
on the other side. So he always, kind of like, well, let's try this over here. Let's try this over here. And so we moved a lot, you know, on that. So, and that affected me, obviously.
Yeah.
I came to Worcester, Ohio. Um, I went to college here, like a tech school in horses, and that's where I met my wife. And I was like, yeah, I'm not moving. So I've been here ever since. I moved here in 1983, and I've stayed here.
I
So
wonder what he was looking for. Was he looking for economy? Was he looking for the outdoors? It doesn't sound like you went to Montana or anything like so many people do.
no, no, it's more economy. He never really wanted to finish what he started, kind of, and it was, well, this isn't working. So instead of like, and when you're, and he was mostly in farming, from dairy cattle, mostly dairy goats. Um, and he started a lot of things in the dairy goat industry that are still being used, but he never followed through with it back then. And I think because of that, he moved. He's like, well, let's go and try it up here. Let's go and try it here. And it just yeah, ended up, we were moving. And there was a couple times it was pretty bad. Obviously when you do that, economy gets a little bit worse. And so there was a time when I had to find some friends to live with, in my early in my high school freshman sophomore year or so. So yeah, it was. I learned a lot from my childhood on entrepreneurship and making things, which helped me in my life. Obviously, now I make knives. So by having that kind of a childhood, I'm not going to say it was a bad, because it shaped me better or worse. I think more for the better. Some people it could shape it for the worse, and I looked at it. I made, back then I made a lot of my own toys, just because, if I wanted something, I couldn't just go out and ask mom and dad for money to buy it, because it wasn't there. So I just made it. And so I was, and my mom, I credit her for that craftsmanship, because she was that way. She was always making something, and she imparted that on us kids. I'm one of four, and so but I was the one that really kind of took it further. The
Are
other
you
ones
the
are still just
are you
doing.
the eldest? Where were you on that scale?
I am the second oldest, so I have an older brother, and then two younger sisters. So yeah, so I was, like I said, I'm making bow and arrows. I mean, that's a usual, young farm kid, young boy making a bow and arrow. But mine was a little bit more. I was 9 years old and making broadheads. So mostly, most of the kids, they make a stick, and they sharpen the stick. And not me. I had to make a broadhead. And yeah, I kind of got in trouble for that one. I'm
So
outside shooting the arrow up in the air at the broadhead.
were you outdoorsy then, obviously?
Yes, yes, very outdoors. In fact, even from my youngest memory, I've always been outdoors. I used to constantly sneak out of the house, and because I went through a period where I was Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett and all these frontier heroes. And so I wanted to live in the wilds. I wanted to live in the woods. So I'd sneak out of the house and just sleep in the woods, like find some log and just sleep. And yeah, I kind of got in trouble a few times because obviously, I'm not a morning person. So I would just stay out in the woods, and my mom and dad would be like, yeah, where are you? They didn't have cell phones back then where you could just, text or anything. So yeah, they kind of made me stop doing that. But yeah, I was always fishing, hunting. I mean, I was huge into fishing back then because we had, wherever we lived, it was weird. We always had, like when I lived in Wisconsin, we lived 2 miles from the Wisconsin River. And so yeah, and I mean, for me, I was 11 years old when we moved to Wisconsin, and I absolutely loved it because Wisconsin it was like an outdoor. I mean, for a young kid,
It
you know,
is, yeah.
yeah, back I would have been in the late 70s. It was just awesome. I'd be down, and Wisconsin River is a fast moving river, so my parents really didn't like me going down there and fishing because if you fall in, because this is right up around the Wisconsin Dells, so it's running pretty fast in that area. But I mean, there's outdoor shops all over the place, and in fact, I bought my first pocket knife in Wisconsin.
And what brand was your first pocket knife? Do you
A K
remember?
bar, yeah, a K bar. It
Yeah,
was
right.
Yeah, it was a two blade K bar, and the weirdest thing is, and this is where the human mind is kind of. I remember vividly walking into the store. In my mind, I remember what the store looked like, and I remember the display case that this little pocket knife was in, and which is weird. I mean, who would have known? Maybe my brain knew back then that, hey, we need to record this because this guy's going to be kind of like into knives.
A
And
little bit, yeah.
just a little bit. And but yeah, I'd love living up there. It was I mean, we lived my dad worked on a farm up there, and their property had a lot of like cliffs and gullies and everything. And I was just, yeah, that was a dream for me. I was constantly up there, hunting, and I think that shaped a lot of that shaped what I ended up being and what I ended up getting into.
Well,
Yeah.
let's work our way there. What were you like in high school? Were you pretty social?
Yeah, I was pretty social. I kind of had to be, because we moved around a lot. So, friends from where I was. And again, it's not, things today aren't like they were back then. Back then you actually had to go to the wall and grab the phone and pick it up to call somebody, so maintaining friendships over long distance was really impossible. So I would make new friends wherever I went and wherever I school that I went to. And it was pretty easy. I mean, I wasn't a popular kid back then. A lot of it was just, my parents didn't have a lot of money. So unfortunately, that's kind of a thing with kids in schools and stuff like that. But I had a lot of friends, and I had a great experience. I was really into sports, and I wasn't terribly that good. I tried basketball. I kind of had to get out of that for a while because my brother actually he played semi-pro basketball, but that was because he's 6'10". Now I'm not even, I'm 5'6". So he grew and I stayed the same. So
Yeah, that's
basketball,
amazing. Where did he get that from? 6'10's huge.
yeah, I don't know. It is I mean, my mom and dad were both regular height. My dad might have been, I don't know, 5'9", 6 foot, something like that. They weren't terribly that tall. It's just my dad always said it's because my brother drank goat milk and I drink coffee.
Yeah.
The whole thing of coffee stunts your growth. So that was kind of what he excused it for. But
How
uh,
tall was the milkman?
something, believe me, if it wasn't for the fact that both of us look exactly alike,
Okay.
It's really weird when you see pictures of us together because we could tell we're brothers, but he's like way, way, towering above me. But
Yeah.
yeah, if it wasn't for that, I would start wondering because I'm the shortest in the family.
Yeah. Fair
Uh,
enough.
but
So
yeah,
then what did you want to be when you grew up in high school, quote unquote? Did you have some sort of aspiration to be a machinist? What did you want to do with your life?
um, honestly, this is going to sound weird, is I actually wanted to initially be a microbiologist.
Oh, okay. Why?
I have no idea. I think some of it was, I was really into animals. I love animals. And this was early on, this was probably seventh, eighth grade and freshman in high school. I started college prep classes in high school, advanced biology, stuff like that to kind of guide that way. But I don't know. I think it started to turn, away from that. Number one, because I wasn't getting straight A's, and you're getting microbiology, you better be, getting really good grades. But the other thing, that's when the horses started coming in, and so when I was 12 years old, I ended up I started my love of horses even before that. I just, we had cows, we had goats, and the other usual, farm animals. But I was really drawn to horses. It just, even before that, I just loved horses. But we never had any. My dad did not like horses. He did not share that. And I remember how I kind of got into horses was I trying to convince my dad to let me buy, or obtain a horse. And he was like, no, 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 it's not going to happen. I even made a little pen and shelter out of an old chicken house and thought I was going to get a pony or something. And I was so mad that I went, when I couldn't get a horse, I went the neighbor that lived about a mile down the road. He's an old guy and he had two horses. And one was a gray and the other one was a sorrel. And I went down. I remember going down there and asking him if I could ride his horses. And again, one of these moments I'll never forget. He said, "Well," he said, "if you can ride them, you can ride them." So neither one of them was broke, and and I was just like, okay. So I had no idea.
Death wish.
Yeah, I ended up breaking both of them and riding them, and and it's funny because as far as the techniques for that, I had no idea.
How old were you?
I probably would have been 13, 12, 13. And
Young.
yeah, yeah, really young. And to be
Just
on,
young enough
unbroke
to be
horses.
stupid enough.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Basically be on unbroke horses, not knowing what the heck I was doing. And which is kind of, it's really interesting on that because, nowadays we have, if you want to know something or you have an interest in something, you just get on YouTube and whatever. And you want to know how to fix your washer and dryer, YouTube it, you'll learn how. Back then, again, I don't want to keep saying that back then because then I really feel old, but back back in those days, you didn't have that. So like training horses, you can't like get on and get up a big time trainer and that has all these podcasts and everything on how to break a horse. So I just went on just what I guess in my head and my heart, and it worked out, and I ended up getting more horses, and I got into training Arabians, and so when I was in high school, and and so when I went to graduate, the whole thing of, well, what are you going to do with your life, and I that was it was difficult at first. I was within literally minutes of joining the Marine Corps. I thought, well, I want to go in the military. And for some reason, right at the last minute, literally the recruiter was coming out to our house so I could sign the paperwork. And I decided, maybe I should go to a tech school in horses. And because I thought, well, if I'm going to get a job on a big horse farm as a trainer, having a two-year degree at least would be better. So that's, at the last minute, that's what I decided to do. And ended up in Worcester because of it, and initially when I first started, my curriculum actually was in dairy, being a
Okay.
dairy farmer. And the reason I thought, well, because I'd already been in horses enough, I thought, well, you really gonna make a living at it. So how about, be a herdsman on a dairy farm and then do horses on the side. So I had this all figured out. And that didn't work out. I was always at the horse barn. Because this school, it's a college, but it's a two-year tech school. And they actually have, if you're in the dairy program, they have a dairy barn that the students go and you learn all this stuff. But they also in the horse program, they have a horse barn and all the horse stuff. Ohio State University is what it is. And I ended up, even though I was in the dairy program, I was at the horse barn. And everybody was like, what are you doing? And I'm like, yeah, you're right. So I switched over to the horse program.
Did you want to be a farrier? What was the end goal there?
Okay, the farrier, that was one of the classes that I took at this college was shoeing horses, was trimming and shoeing farrier work. And I was just like, I really like this is a good way to make money, so I really took an interest in that, and I kept learning more and more, and ended up going down to Kentucky, and I learned off of an old farrier down there on how to trim and shoe problem horses, and then when I came back up to Ohio, my farrier business really took off, and my horseshoeing business, and I had a pretty big clientele for a few years. And during that time, I also trained horses. So during that time, I had about 5 to 6 horses in the barn all the time, as well as my horseshoeing business. And
Yeah, because you did this for a long time. A lot of people don't realize that. I mean, obviously, we associate you with knives, but you were a really successful farrier for a long time.
yeah, yeah,
How
yeah.
many years?
It's I would say, a long time. It's a long time shoeing horses, but it's like the farrier that I have now doing my horses. He actually started 6 months before I did. So him and I were the farriers in this area, and this was back in 1986 on, and he's still shoeing horses. So that's a long time. That's when it was
That's
40.
a long time.
Yeah.
Were you making the little tools that you use to clean the hooves out?
No, that's what's really, it's funny. I get that a lot. A lot of people, like, especially like hoof knives, are like, are you
Yeah.
knives and stuff? And, or hoof, like that trim the feet with the hooves. And I'm like, no, never made one. As a knife maker, I never made one of those. And
Oh,
because
but it's so on brand. Have you thought about doing it now?
no, and I think the reason it's a tool. It's remember we talked about fillet knives. It's
Yeah, which we're going to talk about on the show. I've got lots of fillet knife questions or fillet
yeah,
knife questions.
yeah. It's so the hoof knife it's a tool that I don't know. I think when you as a farrier, you're using that to to buy a custom one and use it on the feet and grind on it. I don't think it would probably go over that well. It would be a great knife, but I don't think there'd be too much of a customer base.
There are some people raising their eyebrows right now in the conversation of if a knife is a tool. And we will come back to this. I want to
Yeah,
just
yeah,
focus right
yeah.
now on your timeline because we're going to dive into knives because there are obviously lots of things to discuss here.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so you're a farrier and then what happens? What, you just wake up one day and decide I'm going to make a knife? Where does your timeline go from here?
That's yeah, and that's where that's probably my most asked question is what happened? Where did that
What
come
happened?
from?
Yeah.
So it's funny. So yeah, I was training horses, shoeing horses, and what happened was there was a really good friend of mine who he had just retired from the U.S. Special Forces. He was a Green Beret. He was in Vietnam, and he was a very dear friend of ours, and he still is. I don't want to touch that in past tense. Sorry, Jim. Um, but he was retiring from the military, and I'm like, I want to get him a knife. And back then, I didn't have the money really to give him a knife, so I thought, well, I'm making one again. That craftiness that my mom imparted into me had always been there. I was always making something, so I thought, well, I'll just make a knife. And it was like, I have no idea, kind of like that first horse I got on. I have no idea what I'm doing. And so I found a plow point. And what is it? Plowshares. The very point of them, or the bottom of them, is like a hardenable steel. And I figured, well, that should be hard enough. So I forged it in my coal forge, and it was actually a Tanto blade. And just because I really like Tanto style blades back then. And
What is a Tanto style blade?
a Tanto, it comes from more of a Japanese influence, and what I was making was what we kind of considered Americanized Tantos. The Japanese pure Tanto does not have a defined armor piercing tip, and the Americanized Tanto has a you can see the tip is kind of like angled. The tip of the
Yeah.
knife is kind of angled, and which ends up with a lot of steel in the grind. So it's kind of like an armor. It's real tough. And so I made this knife and I wrapped it with cord because I didn't know how to do a wood hand or anything. So I wrapped it with cord, paracord, and I gave it to him. And I'm like, and believe me, if you've seen it now, you'd be like, Rick, stick with your day job. Yeah, by today's standards, it was pretty rough. It was pretty rough. But I was like, oh my gosh, because I'd always been into knives ever since buying that little pocket knife in that hardware store, in Wisconsin. I had always been into knives. It was just, I don't know, it's just kind of weird. And so yeah, to me that was like that it set me on a path that I now had I imagined where it would have taken me. I never would have in a million years imagined. Um, and I didn't know anything about custom knives or making knives or anything. So I went to a gun show, and I remember seeing this guy, and he had a table, and he had all these beautiful knives on his table. And I was like, did you make these? And he's like, yeah, kind of like duh. And and for some reason in my mind, I'm thinking, if you're making something that beautiful, a factory has to make it. Yeah, I just didn't equate. And so anyway, I asked him, I said, can I come to your shop? And he was like, yeah, sure. And so I ended up becoming friends with him. I only went to his shop one time, and because he lived pretty far away. And so after that first knife, I wanted to make another one. And so I made another one, and I actually still have that knife. And it's my design, really wasn't up to par. The handle was like, I don't know if you can see it, the handle was like that long, and the blade
Right.
was that one. I'm
Huge.
like, yeah, I got something wrong here. I don't have that small hands. And so so anyway, so I just kept making knives, and I'm sure back then my family was probably like, what are you doing? You need to do something that actually makes money, and but I loved crafting things. I love, making things with my hands. So I just and it got to a point where after about the fifth or sixth night, then people were like, they wanted to buy them. And I mean, and that was the second thing that just thrilled me, and it still thrills me to this day, knowing that people are willing to give up how much money of their hard-earned cash, to buy something that I created, to work so many hours, save up, and then buy something that I created. It to me, I still it's a huge thrill. And so I remember, getting that first order and just like, oh my gosh, I was on cloud nine. I'm like, wow, this guy, it was a guy who owned a gun shop. He won 3 knives. and he ordered 3 knives from me. And I remember telling my wife, it's like, yes, yes, I ran. She was out in the field, and I went run out in the field and told her, I said, I got an order for 3 knives. Can you believe it? And it just kind of just kept rolling with that, and
Was it all word of mouth? Was that how people were finding out about it?
yeah, it was kind of word of mouth. And also it was my shoeing business, my training and shoeing business. So
Oh.
all of my customers became my first knife customers. And maybe they, I laugh because maybe they were like, oh, if we don't buy his knife, and he might not come back and do our horses, so we'll buy this knife off of him. I don't know. I teasingly say that, but yeah, a lot of my training customers. In fact, a lady that works for me now, I used to train her horses way back when, and I also shoot her horses, and she was one of the ones that I would always show my knives to, my new creations to. And now she works for me, and we always, we go back in time and remember those days. She goes, I remember when you had long hair, and you, because I had really long hair back then. She's like, I remember when you had long hair and you'd show me the knives you made, and now look, it's crazy.
So I've got questions about when you were making these knives. I'm assuming you were also making horseshoes at the time.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So that's why you had all the tools.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what that first knife too. I kind of why I started forging it, and I'm glad you brought that up, is because I got bored turning horseshoes, and
Right.
so I like, hey, I forge this knife, and that's
So
why
how long would it take to make one of those initially by hand yourself?
back then,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, that knife took me probably a week and a half, 2 weeks to make that knife.
Okay. That's a lot of time.
Yeah, 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 and that's what my tools that I had back then were. Yeah, rudimentary. My first grinder, mostly the tools that knife makers use nowadays. The basic grinding tool that you use to grind the edge bevels is a 2x72 belt grinder. And back then, I didn't have the money to buy something like that, so I found an old washing machine motor, and I put I don't know if you know those disc pads you put on drills to
Hmm.
sand.
Yep.
So I took that, modified it, and put it on this washing machine motor. That was my first grinder. It was pretty bad. And that's what took me. It would take me using sandpaper, to whittle down, the edge bevels on a knife. It took, oh my God, I don't know how I did it. I don't know how I had the patience. It took me
No kidding.
forever sitting there going, and I was in a my shop was in a renovated turkey coop. So yeah, it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. It was so this turkey coop had set where it sets for like a long time before I took it over. And so it had quite the rat population. And
Right.
and
Keeping you
rat,
company.
yeah, and it was winter when I was doing this. So I took and I insulated the rafters. Well, that made a place for the rats to run up over the ceiling. So I'd be there grinding, and the rats would have races above my head. So it was kind of fun.
So I know that you didn't lose your passion for horses because having visited you last year, clearly you're still very passionate about horses, but were you losing passion for shoeing them?
Yes, yeah. So during that time when I went from shoeing and training horses into like making knives full time. And I didn't stop one and start the other. It was
Oh,
a
okay.
slow progression. I ended up spending more time making knives and then less time with the horses. And obviously, shoeing horses is not the easiest occupation to have. It's pretty hard work. And training, it's kind of the same thing. It's not really like real physically hard work, but it's mentally. You have all these horses, and a lot of times when the owner's supposed to come, then the horse is doing great, but they decide not to do very good when the owner's there. So, and you're like, oh. And at the same time, my wife was managing a horse production farm. And so at the same time, we had about 60 to 70 mares, which translated about 30 to 40 colts every year. So we would have to halter break all of those colts to get them ready for the fall sale. So during that time, I also had that on top of my training and the shoeing, uh, and yeah, it just got to be so much. And we lived in a corner in an apartment, about a 200 square foot apartment in the corner of the horse barn. So we literally ate, lived, and slept horses. And
Yeah.
yeah, you get burnt out when you do that. And I was just like, you know, as far as the work part of the horses, I'm like, I really just want to make knives. And so that kind of, I just less now shoeing horses, getting out of shoeing horses is not easy because you got customers. There's not that many farriers around, and the customers, they kept calling, please, please come and do our horse, and so it was hard. It was hard for me to say no. The only way that I could really break from it completely was I sold my equipment, most of my equipment.
Yeah. But
That's
you didn't need it for, well, I guess at that point you pivoted to specific or to specialized knife making tools.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, shoeing horses and blacksmithing, you don't really need that many tools. Anvil, a hammer, some tongs, and a forge. Knife making. Now, that being said, now you can make knives with very, very few tools. Literally, all you need is a file, really. I mean, a file, and you don't even need a forge. You can just take a piece of steel and file on it. It just depends on where you want to be in your knife making. So it's
Or
like,
in 3 weeks.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I just kept getting more and more tools, and as far as I got that belt grinder and other things, as I made money, I just reinvested it back into getting the tools that I need and stuff like that, and
Were
it's
they all fixed blades at the time? Sorry to cut you off. Were they fixed blades?
yeah, most of them when I first started were fixed blades. It's kind of weird, but I started into making folders not that long after the fixed blades. So I think I made fixed blades for maybe 3 years before I made my first folder.
Okay.
So it's really kind of pretty quick. Now my first folders were slip joints, just regular slip joints, not locking folders. And the first couple were kind of crude, learning the mechanisms, and I kind of got sparked my interest in mechanisms and engineering and design. Was some of those first folding knives. And I did make the knife that I bought when I was a kid.
I was going to ask you because KR comes in to, it's got a major influence in your story, right?
Yeah. There were certain knives, because I collect knives too. I mean, I got a lot of knives, other people's knives, other companies, other makers. I love knives, and back then there was a lot of knives that I would say like influenced me, and also kind of like I'd see a knife and I'm like, I really like that style or whatever. And in fact, and sometimes movies, especially back then, there was a lot of movies that came out. That was like the early part of the action adventure movies. Of course, you have Rambo, First Blood. That knife, his knife is absolutely iconic as far as really breaking custom knife making into the forefront, into the mainstream. Because a lot of people back then, they didn't know that people just like me, they didn't know that you could actually make one of these knives. And when First Blood came out, it was such a hit. And a lot of it was because of that knife. I mean, anybody that's in that action adventure genre, you remember him holding that knife, and see the saw teeth on the back, and it's like, wow, check that out. And so a lot of that influenced, what I was making back then. Um, in fact, there was one movie called The Highlander. And I can't remember the actors in it, but it's kind of like a fantasy movie. And the sword that he had, like a Japanese style sword, like a katana, but the handle of the sword, and of course I really liked it because had a horse head on the end of it, and that was one of the other reasons I got into making knives, because I wanted to make that, and I never made it.
So were you always focused then on, or was the plan always to make more of a collectible style knife? because this might be a fitting time to start talking about
Yeah.
um, tool, function versus, well, not function, tool versus collectible.
Right.
What would you say? Actually, maybe I'm jumping ahead. I don't want to push you too fast here because eventually Rick Hinderer knives went cra- it boomed, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, now people who are just getting into the knife scene, or maybe they're just hearing about you, uh, you have been said to make the best knives in the world by a lot of people. There's a cult following, if you will. I'm trying
Yeah.
not to be offensive to anyone, but there is a bit of a cult following. How did that all happen? And this will all tie into the whole tools and collectibles thing or
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think of how the whole circle, it started when I first started making knives. They were hunting knives. They were everyday carry knives. They were, it's again some of those military type knives, which really they weren't. In fact, that friend of mine I made that first knife for, he was a special forces Green Beret, and I asked him. I said, what do you what would you like in a knife that you're going to carry into war? And in my mind, I'm thinking this, like Rambo knife is, you know, this real killing looking knife and everything. And he looked at me and he says, well, he said, it's got to shave a tent peg down, and you have to be able to open up your C rats. And I'm like, but that's not like sexy or cool or anything. That's just like, and he said, no, that's what you use a knife for. A knife is for everyday tasks. And he told me the one time, he said, if I have to use my knife for self-defense, he said, I'm telling you, crap has gone bad, really, really bad. He said, you've used everything else in your arsenal, and then all you are is you're standing there going toe to toe with the enemy with a knife. He said that things have gone bad. So his point was, is you make it to be used every day, and so that shaped a lot of my early designs, my hunting knives, my camp knives. They were camp knives. They were knives to be used, not to like look
Highlander.
to do
Yeah.
something that you'll never use it for. In other words, to sit on a shelf and look mean. So that, as far as my design back then, that really influenced that a lot, because I that early thought process. So you need to make a knife that's going to be used for these mundane tasks, everyday tasks. So it's kind of like the everyday carry thing started back then. And so these are the type of knives that I'm making. I'm forging, and I'm also there's two different ways to make a knife as far as handmade. You got the forging method, and then what we call stock removal. Stock removal is, to explain it, you take a piece of steel and you grind away everything that doesn't look like a knife, and then you have a knife. Whereas forging, you take a piece of steel and you pound it to look like a knife. So that's kind of like two different ways you can make a knife.
Yeah.
So I did the forging method, but I also, alongside of that, I did the stock removal. I would take bars of steel and grind them into a knife. And no matter which one I made, they were made with a specific purpose in mind, and that was to be used as an everyday carry knife or a hunting knife. And so as I'm making these knives, and I'm going to gun shows and selling my knives and selling them to my training customers and shoeing customers, and I started into, again, I'm getting more and more better in my craft, and so I'm seeing these knives that, oh, maybe the handles were pearl, and now pearl is not something you would think of using if you're going on an expedition. Okay, I mean, it's more of a pretty thing. But I'm like, it's like, this really looks cool. So I start making knives, and it's not just a clear cut, stop on this knife and then make them like this, what you would consider to be like a collectible art knife. It was just, I was drawn into that genre because of my craft. And I mean, I started in a gold inlay and carving handles and everything. And all of a sudden I'm making these, and I'm influenced by a couple other bladesmiths that were in that genre. Hugh Bartrig, probably one of the top art knife makers, and a blacksmith ever. And so I went to his shop a lot, and he would show me all these different techniques, and I'm like, wow, that's, again, it's that craftiness that my mom started, And so I'm going down that road and I'm making these art knives, but I'm still in the back of my head, even though that they're pretty and they're art knives, they're still made to be used. And I always thought back then that a knife can be pretty and a knife can be really like, wow, but it can also be, we can't lose the fact that it is a knife. And whereas some may have lost that a little bit, like, and go after, well, it just needs to look pretty. And I always kept that. So some of the Damascus that I was making, I actually made it to where it, it can be, it's like the main purpose is to hold an edge and be sharp. You make it to where you can sharpen it easy and use. So you could take this really, really pretty knife with gold inlay and carving, and you really could take it out and actually use it to, dress out an elk or whatever, and it's the same knife. So I always kept that even to this day. It has to be a knife first. If people collect it, that's great, but it has to be a knife first. If you lose that, you're just making sculptures, really.
Yeah, art pieces, expensive art pieces, because these knives are expensive. I mean, what does an average Hinderer knife go for nowadays?
Well, the average, like the XM18 is $425. And so we'll go up even more on that when we get into a lot of different finishes and stuff like that. We sell some less than that. Some of our automatics are less than that. So it's probably average. If you average everything together, you're probably looking at about $500 on the average from the low to the high.
Yeah.
So yeah. I mean, you can go into Walmart and so I get that even when I was first setting up at gun shows. I remember people coming up and they would look and then they'd be like, well, I can go over to Walmart. I could buy a knife that'll cut the same thing for $39.95.
What is the difference, just real quick? Because I wanted to also talk about how long it was taking at the time when you started the factory.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we're going to go next. But
Okay.
what is the difference? I don't want to, I usually like to get the timeline of my guest and then dive into the more technical side of things. But I'm very curious, what is the difference between a Walmart knife and one of your knives from
The
a
big,
quality
yeah,
standpoint?
yeah. The big thing is quality, obviously. There's long answers and there's short answers, and I give people the short answer that ask, and I say, well, it's the knife you'll never have to buy again. I mean, this is a knife that truly will last you a lifetime. So you spend the money once, that could be the knife that you'll hand down to your kids.
Yeah.
A Walmart knife, when I say a Walmart knife is probably, made overseas, wink, wink, and they aren't going to, the materials, the tolerances, they aren't going to last. If they last a hunting season, you're lucky. Now that's the first thing. It's just them actually lasting and not just falling apart. But also it's the steel. The steel that we use in our knives is I tell a lot of people we pay as much money just for the steel for a blade as what some people pay for a whole knife. So the
Right.
steel itself is we're using the absolute top steel that you can get. Now that being said, because it's some of the top steel, the machining and the workability of that is a lot more difficult than a cheap knife. So a cheap knife, for instance, the steel, you can be able to get a type of steel that you can stamp out. You can stamp the blades, like boom, blade's done. Boom, another blade's done. We can't do that with our knives. Number one, the steel wouldn't allow you to stamp it out. So we have to use a water jet machine, which is a very expensive machine to do that. So you got more cost in manufacturing it because of the material that's in it. So, and again, that's still part of the short answer. The long answer is I can go on, bit by bit, part by part of why, from the pivot that we make, the type of steel we use just in the pivot is a very expensive steel. And we heat treat those pivots. The cheap Walmart knife, they don't do that because if they did, they can do that, but it's going to be an expensive knife, you
Yeah.
know. So that's what you get. I mean, and it's also it's pride of ownership. So and I use that a lot for my own when I buy things. I'm proud when I buy something, I look at it and the value is in the value is in what went into making it, and it's something that you can tell your friends that, you're proud of this. You buy a knife from, overseas, and how can you, like, hey, check out this knife I bought at the gas station? Yeah, it's just not, that pride of ownership just isn't in there. When you see people light up and they're like, yeah, check out this knife I bought. Look at that, and a lot of people don't even know how much you paid for it, but they're looking like, oh my gosh, that is really cool. I mean, look at it's so smooth, and that right there is, to me, is worth it. So without getting into even longer answer on the differences, I think a lot of people know when you put one of our knives next to one of these, they can be able to see for themselves, and a lot of them will have their own reasons too, that
Yeah.
maybe I've never heard of or thought about. But
My friends, the first thing they do is they grab your knives and they try to take the hair off their arms.
hmm
And I
hmm
had to say, be careful. And obviously they wind up with a bunch of hair on the blade. They're incredibly sharp.
yeah, and that's a lot of the steel and the sharpening that we sharpen by hand.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this whole by hand thing. So at the time, you were still making these by hand
hmm
as you were getting more popular. So
Yes.
how long was it taking per knife approximately then?
Um, it would take, depending on the knife. Now, obviously, the art knives, I back then I had a couple knives that I would take a month. It would take me a month to make it. And these were, you know, incredibly detailed carved knives and everything. So, and you'd think a whole month, like, um, and now, some of the other nights where wouldn't do any of that, like embellishment, it would still take 3, 4 days, for a folding knife. It just depends. It depends on if I screwed up, like, oh, I gotta, make this part all over again. And believe me, when you're making stuff by hand, that happens. So it just depends, it's even today, people ask me, well, how long does it take you to make this? And I tell them a smart aleck answer, but it's kind of true. It's taken me 40 years. Took me 40 years to make that knife.
But
And
let's talk
they
about
look at me like, you're being and I'm like, no, it took me 40 years to learn. And that's why it's.
but let's talk about your factory because that's where I was last year. And okay, just for people who don't know the story.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to go and meet you. I was excited to go and see the quote unquote factory because I say that because it's like a warehouse. It's absolutely enormous. It was one of the most impressive operations I've ever seen. You took me through a tour. That tour is up on YouTube on my channel if people want to go and see it. You knew every station like the back of your hand, every person. It was like an enormous family. It was really genuinely impressive, Rick. I'm not just saying that.
Oh, thanks. Thanks.
How did that all start? Did it start big like that? I'm assuming no. It must have started smaller.
Yeah, a lot smaller. That transition from just me and my little shop by myself making my knives by hand, that transition was not it. It wasn't something that I was like, this is my business plan. It wasn't that at all. None of this was in my plans, back then. Not that I didn't want it. I didn't even know anything about it. I didn't have any business sense or anything. Like, okay, I come up with a business plan and I'm going to invest this and blah blah blah. I really, what it was, when I started getting more popular, and a lot of that was because of my design work with some of the companies, early companies. People started finding out about my designs, and so my knives just I'm like, oh, well, I got orders for this many knives. I need to make more knives, and there's only one of me. How do I do that? And I'm like, well, maybe I can get somebody to help me. And literally, my first employee was my lieutenant at the fire department, and because during this time I was a volunteer firefighter, and so I asked my lieutenant. I said, "Well, can you come out and help, like, cut blades out on the bandsaw?" And yeah, I'll be out tomorrow. And that was kind of like my first employee. And and I got more knives out just for him cutting them out on the bandsaw. And And so that's kind of like started the whole company thing really back then. Now he was just a part-time guy, and when I moved into a bigger shop, that's when I had to start getting serious about hiring somebody full time, and so I hired a friend of the family, and he came in, and he's still with me. He's my shop manager, and he was my first employee, and he's still with me. And back then, we talk about the family. Back then it really was. These weren't employees. These were people that I brought into the shop to help me out. And so, and again, I don't know how to be a boss. So these are just people that help me. And even today, I think I have 27, I think. Um, that's why they're still family. These are still people that help me out, and I come in and I want to know about their lives, and it's always, it's just in me, for that. I mean, we have a job to do here, obviously, but at the same time, also has to be fun, and I'm anti-drama. I don't like drama. So, in any kind of workplace, there's always a possibility for that because people spend most of their lives at their work, so, but and also because it's such a I would say warmer atmosphere, I think it shows in the product. A lot of people are like, well, how do you get that kind of precision, that quality and everything? Well, it's the people that are doing it, because I can't make every knife, but I have to impart what I know into them, because they're an extension of what I came up with. And I really think the secret to that is having the employees that really care, and they do. They are unbelievably passionate about what they do, and I think that's a real secret of what we have at Rickender Knives that I think some other companies may not have.
How it felt like it when I was there. How many knives per day are you guys cranking out over there?
I honestly, I have no idea. Honestly, I don't know that answer because I am not down here every day. I'm riding horses and stuff like that now. So, yeah, I honestly, I couldn't answer that. But it's a few more than what people really think. We're a smaller company, but there obviously when you have 27 employees, you have to make enough to be able to take care of all those salaries and stuff. But other than that, I'm not sure. I'd have to ask Sam.
I strongly encourage people to watch the video that we posted. Let's get technical if you don't mind for a bit.
Hmm?
Okay.
Get
So,
to
w- um I'll just kind of rapid fire you.
uh,
Opinions on steel.
hmm.
Why is there always so much emphasis on what the blade is made out of?
And that's a good question, because nowadays we have a lot of, especially the internet. The internet has exploded this steel of the month kind of thing. You get a new wonder steel, and this and that, and without getting into a real long conversation about some of those and some of my opinions on that and why, steel matters. Obviously, in a knife, you want a quality steel. Um and we use the absolute, the best that we can get. But as far as what some of these people, let's and I might seem like I'm shifting around here,
No, it's
um
okay.
but usability, okay. I make all of my knives to be used, and so I use the best possible steel, even if I know that most of these people will never use them. And it's the same people that want the best possible steel in their knife. And I used to laugh because they would get their knife and they'd take pictures of it and they'd put it up on Facebook, Instagram, or whatever. And then 6 months later, they would have a for sale post, knife never used. Why did you worry so much about the steel when you were never going to use the knife to begin with? And so that's kind of like, and I tell people, it's like, please use my knives, because you're going to really appreciate everything that went into that knife, and the reason why, the cost of that knife, only if you use it. the ergonomics of the handle, the usability of the lock, the steel, the quality of the steel. So in other words, getting back to your steel question, if I sold a knife and it had 440C. Now 440C is a great stainless steel, but you ask any of the of the steel nerds about, oh well, 440C, oh no, that bad steel. Well, what are you basing that on? The fact that you never use your knife to see. So now Magna Cut that we're using now, yeah, it's a better steel than 440C. But for most people, and this is something that I wanted to do at some point, is send two knives out with two different steel and don't tell anybody what the steel is, and give me a report back on that. Which one did you like best? Which one did you think cut the best? Which one did you think that lasted the longest? And it would probably be funny if the answers that you would get. It's kind of like bourbon testing. You could set $1,000 bottle of bourbon here and I don't know, $30 bottle here, and don't tell anybody. It's a blind taste test. Half the time it'd probably be the $30 bottle that they would like. So I think some of it is like it again, we use the very best steel, but as far as people, they get wrapped up into the steel thing. I think they go a little bit too far, and plus, everybody's a metallurgist, and we leave some of that science up to actual, metallurgists. And so again, we use the best steel you possibly can, but please guys, go out and use the knives.
What about emphasis on handle material specifically?
Yeah. Well, the handle material, again, that goes into the usability of the knife. Okay. If you're going to be in a very, very harsh environment, of course your G10, which is a fiberglass composite, carbon fiber, some of those man-made materials are going to last longer than wood and natural material, because natural materials are a little bit porous. Even hardwood is still porous. It's going to move. It's going to soak up liquids and stuff like that. So it's not going to be as tough. Now, is it going to be something that, again, wood knives have been used forever? Leather handled knives, won World War II for us. And that's what a lot of people are like, wow, the old K-bar, it's junk. Really? Kind of. The soldiers didn't think so back then, and they were actually using it. So but that being said, we use on our folders. Now we've been doing a lot more wood, but we stabilize it, and so it's a natural product. It could move, and you don't want to keep it soaked like you would a knife with a G10 handle, and so it's what are you going to use it for? And I think if you answer that question, you'll kind of steer more towards what you would like. If you're not gonna go out and do a hike for 2 weeks, and then yeah, get that beautiful wood handle knife. Something to show your friends, but it'll still hold up. Just maybe not as good as a G10. But on the handle, the ergonomics is absolutely important.
It is. It
Yeah.
is one of the first things I look for. Thoughts on fillet knives? Even though some people may have guessed this, but what are your thoughts on fillet knives?
Fillet knives, it's funny. Some of my first knives way back in the early '90s that I made were fillet knives. I had a lot of friends that were fishermen, and of course I was. And so yeah, fillet knife. Like, oh, I got to make a fillet knife. Now, my early fillet knives were probably a little too thick. So, some people like, some fishermen like, having more stout blade. Depends on, what you're going to, I don't know, maybe a big 20-pound salmon, maybe you might want something. Now we actually, I went on a fishing trip up in the boundary waters up in northern Minnesota. And, we were, a friend of mine, we caught I'm trying to think of it might've been a pike, but anyway, he used one of my folders to, to fillet it and dress it out. And I even got pictures of it. It worked great. So you can use anything, but a lot of people like the flexible, the flexible blade on a
Yeah.
fillet knife. And I was talking to the guides up in Alaska actually in August when I go up salmon fishing. And I if anybody's using a knife for anything, I'm always asking, so what do you like? What do you like in that, in a blade and a handle? And they find out I'm a knife designer, and they're all like, oh, well, I would love to have it like this, or and you ask, I'm sure it's the way with fly rods. Yes, 20 different people are going to get 20 different what I like, and every guide I talk to, it's funny. They like, well, I want a handle that's a lot bigger, that will fill out the hand because it's cold here in Alaska, and your hands get dexterity. I don't like those little handles. And then the next guy, oh, well, I like it if it's small, um, but the one constant was ergonomics, because if they're going to be filleting fish all day long, they don't want hot spots in the handle, because of the fact that it makes your job harder. If, a knife is a tool, it's an extension of your hand. If it's working against you, you have to work harder to use the knife. Why would you want a knife like that? And I think that was a constant I got from all of them. So a long answer on a fillet knife like that, and also the length of the blade. I got a lot of different, I like about 5 inches on mine, but here in Ohio, it's mostly bluegill. So
Yeah.
you need anything
Slightly
long.
different.
Yeah, yeah. So and also when you're looking at panfish, you want something flexible. It's just a lot easier you know, to work with.
Next question is how you sharpen your blades.
Mhm.
I was fascinated by the machinery. Can you explain how you guys do that?
Yeah, so we use a 2x72 belt grinder, and it's like I said, it's done by hand. Um, and the as far as the manufacturing process, so the edge bevels, which is the bevels of the knife, so those are ground, and then the knife is built. But we grind it to about a 15,000th, where the edge is 15,000 thick, and then we sharpen it from that, and that's what I call the secondary bevel, and that's done by hand. So it's literally, it's a skill, and we sharpen it on a 2x72 belt grinder with a 220 grit belt, and um, and then we strop it on a leather belt after that, and it makes it hair popping sharp. And
What was all the water that was blowing? It looked like laser, but it was actually water.
was that the water jet machine, or
Yeah. Yeah,
or
what
maybe there's the machining centers. There's a lot of water, liquid. That the machining centers, I'll just cover both of them real quick. The machining centers is like a mill, so you're using a rotating cutter to mill out the blades and the titanium and stuff. Now we have to have coolant on that, because if you don't, yeah,
That's what it was. Yes, this.
yeah, the coolant is like a white kind of waterish stuff, and it's actually water with the coolant mixed with it, and it makes a solution, and that keeps the tool and the material cool. Otherwise, that tool's spinning. I don't know. Could be like 3,000 RPM, and especially if it's going through titanium, it's going to heat up really fast if you don't have a coolant on it, and so you're burning the end mill is just going to burn right up. So that cools it, keeps it cooled down, and it's recycled through. Usually about 2 months, and they got to change it out. So yeah, and the water jet uses water, but it uses sand at the very last. And I'm sorry, I talk with my hands.
No, that's okay. This part of this goes up on YouTube, so you're good to go. Keep going.
But a sand is injected. It's called garnet, but it's injected into the water stream at the last minute. Now that's running at 53,000 psi, and that's the laser. It cuts like a laser. It'll actually cut through 9 inches of steel. So yeah, it's
Oh
one.
my gosh.
Yeah, it's one of the machines that's just really cool. I couldn't wait to buy years ago when I first bought my first water jet. I couldn't wait. I was like, oh, this is such a cool machine. So we use that
You
to cut the blades out.
you had expressed another machine that was your favorite. It was almost like a big tank of water, something you'd
That's the
had for
water
a
jet.
long time.
Yep, that's the water jet. Yeah, it's like
That's the one. Yeah.
that's the one. Yeah, it's and the tank of water. That's the obviously the uses a lot of water, so that holding tank is there's probably 200 gallons of water in there, and it circulates around. In other words, the water, and it was just really interesting too, because my water jet, the water is recirculated. So, and the water has to be absolutely surgically clean by the time it gets to the nozzle. And when I say surgically clean, it goes through, I think it was 28 different filters. Um, in other words, when it goes into the sand is injected, it ends up the old sand. It's like a slurry. So the water is really in the holding tank. The water is really dirty. By the time it circulates through all of the filters and comes back around and goes back through the jet, it goes through like 28 different filters because it filters it from all the sand out to where it has to be surgically clean. In other words, the dissolved particles is like microns. So it's in fact the water people told me it's like so clean you can't drink it because there's no minerals or anything in it because the water is moving like at almost the speed of sound. It's just a fascinating. The guy that came up with that technology, man, he's smart.
Have
So
you had to create any tools yet? Have you managed to put your name on any sort of amazing new technology?
for tools,
Yeah.
for knife making, no, that's one thing. All of my patents and stuff have been just for the knives that I created from the tools, but I've never other than fixtures and things like that that I've made to help with the knife making process. Other than that, no tools or anything. I guess that's just one area that I don't have the aptitude for for that. I'll take what they come up with and then take it further and make some cool knives with it.
I think that's fair. So what's next for you then? What's the plan? Because how old are you now? We haven't covered that, but you don't seem like you'd. Do you mind sharing? How old are you? How old
Uh
you are?
oh yeah. I just turned 60.
Yeah. So what's the plan? What do you want to do now? Do you plan on scaling, or are you going to leave it as is and take a step back? What are you wanting to do now?
Well, it's a good question because I got back into horses. So for many years, when I got burnt out of horses, I put that part of my life aside, and but I didn't realize that once a horseman, always a horseman, and it was always there. It's just I had other things that were occupying my mind, and we got back into horses. Actually, my wife, she was riding with her friends, and now during that time, every once in a while, I'd go out to Arizona and we'd go on this ranch and we'd go out in the desert riding horses, and but it was like once every few years, and I loved it. I'm like, yeah, I still dig it. I still like it. And but she wanted to get a horse to ride with a friend. So she went to we found a local farm that's they're actually ended up being like one of the top in the country in family type horses and really broke horses. And so we bought one and brought it home, and and it was like her horse, and well, he was a pony and he was kind of being a little turd. And so I told her, I said, well, I'll get on him, and I go back to my training days. And because I found when I rode like out in Arizona, my mind, I was always a trainer. When I get on a horse, I'm always in that mode. And so I had fun with his name's Diamond. And so then it was like, my wife was like, well, you need to get a horse so we can go riding together. And I'm like, okay, I'm like, well, whatever. I was still kind of tepid on that. It's like, And so we went to the sale and she got this horse, this Palomino horse, and I didn't even see him before the sale. So in other words, she liked him, and she got the last bid on him, and I went up and we had a Amish guy that hauled him back to our farm, and I got him off the trailer, and I'm like, Lori, this is this is a performance horse, and because I was going to ride the pony because he needed a little work and she was going to get another horse. And I said, well, you're not going to be able to ride him right now because I'm going to have to work him because he's a performance horse and he's a great horse, but it's kind of like like a Ferrari compared to a Chevy. So the Chevy's a great car, but it's not a Ferrari, and you better know how to drive it. So I got Sundance, and that's his name, and so I started riding him more, and that training thing came back out. I'm like, and I'm like, instead of riding him, I'm working him, and I'm like, it got to where it was like way back when that spark, that passion for horses. I'm like, it's been 20 some years, but I'm really digging this. And so we got another horse, and that was because this horse was she was a yearling, and her bloodlines go back to the bloodlines that Lori's dad had on his farm. So she's what they call legacy. And so her ancestors were running in the pastures that we have right now for our horses. So it's really so it was kind of something like that. We thought it'd be neat. So we got her, and then I got another one, and then another one, and I built a facility, an indoor riding arena, an outdoor riding arena, and it was something that I always dreamed about back when I was training horses. So that kind of, again, I found out that my love for horses is still there. Actually, a little bit more than, I mean, back then I did it for a living. I loved horses, but I did it for a living. And the horses that I was working and riding were not my own horses. So you couldn't get attached to them. These
Yeah.
guys, yeah, I'm letting them get away with crap that I'd always told my customers back then, don't do. And so
You're
I'm
like a grandpa now when it comes
yeah,
to bringing a horse
exactly.
over.
Exactly. So yeah, I'm really enjoying getting back into the horses. And what does that equate to the knife business? I was fortunate enough about almost 5 years ago. I hired my general manager that I have right now, Sam, and he is a wonderful, wonderful guy. And then he in turn, we hired a company controller, accountant, who is Brian, who is a wonderful, wonderful, and we've built a team that has allowed me to. I let them. They're young. They're in their 20s, and I let them because they just. I mean, my fire has to be tempered somewhat because I'm still like, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. And but I want them to take, because I'm definitely not done at 60. I'm definitely not that. But I want them to take the company further than what I had. And it's allowed me, which is really cool, it's allowed me to go back to my roots and do the things that I did that grew the company. Because before they came along, I was a manager. I wasn't a knife maker. I wasn't a knife designer. I was a manager. I was managing people, and I was looking at the books and doing this. And I found, as an artist, I was suffocating.
Yeah.
To me, creating things and making things is life. And I wasn't doing that by being a company owner. So I needed to get back to breathing again. I needed to go back to life. So when I got them and they wanted to do all of this, all the company stuff, I was like, have at it. So I'm back to making knives by hand again over in the farm shop that I showed you, and designing again, and riding horses, and which is neat. The other day I was forging in my forge shop, and I was sitting and I'm looking at my watch, and I'm like, oh, I need to get this wrapped up because I got a horse to work. And I'm thinking this in my mind, and I stopped, and I'm like, and I started getting emotional. And I'm like, oh my God, that's the exact thing I was saying 30 years ago. Like, wow, this is weird. So it's that full circle, you know.
Yeah.
I say I've come full circle in my personal life, but as far as the company, we are because I'm designing again and I'm fresh. I love being down here. I love working with the guys and the machines. I love doing new things with them. And now I can do it more because of how the company is set up and how and what Sam is doing. He's got his thing, and my importance is what I'm good at, and it's working. And that's why we have so many exciting things at for Rick and Their Knives, because it's like there's so much going on. We got so many new projects, and it opens up my mind to come up with these new, these new projects, and new knives and new grinds and all of this stuff. It's opening all that up, and then I've got great people at the top that are taking that, and they want to take what my dreams are and take them even further. So the longevity of Rick and Their Knives is, I'm a lucky person. A lot of guys that start a business, they get to a certain point, they're like, okay, now what do I do? And this allows me to carry that company forward, my name forward, and it gets me back to doing things that I really like to do. So yeah, I'm at a great point in my life right now.
Well, I'm going to wrap it up there because that's probably the perfect ending. Where can people, I know that you're not one to shill your own stuff here, but where can people find you? Obviously, this is where you insert your shameless plug and your website address.
Uh, yeah, me as far as the company,
Yeah, because you're not accessible personally, right?
no, I mean, I have my own Facebook account, just Rick Hinder, on Facebook. I've got my own Instagram account, but I can't remember even the last time I was on it. Because I did the company, they can find us on Facebook and Instagram, obviously in
And
the.
I'll link all that up just for people listening.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
But as me personally, yeah, you can get on my Facebook personal page, just Rick Hinder, I think. And they can access me there.
It's so funny, Rick, because you're so humble and so many people view you as a celebrity figure in this space. Yet you would never know. Even listening to you right now, you would just never know. Do you get bombarded with people when you go to shows? Have you kept your face out of things, or do people know you and
Yeah,
recognize you at this point?
yeah. I get bombarded. Especially at the Blade show. And and honestly, again, that the celebrity status, it's only in my industry, and even then, I'm just a knife maker, and I tell people it's like, I just God gave me a gift of making knives, and I never forget that it's my people, my customers, my clients that made me that, and if it wasn't for them, I would have a lot of knives stacked up in my house, because I'll probably always make knives, but I always look at that. That's they're the ones that give me that ability when I go to a show, and so I try to talk to everybody. And I'm pretty tired by the end of the day, but everybody is really precious to me, as far as, so that humble. That's just who I am. I don't. I mean, I've met a lot of celebrities, and celebrities in other industries, from music to, and a lot of them also are kind of that way. What you wouldn't think. I think deep down it's like it's what we do. And I'm just a knife maker, and I love going to the shows to meet a lot of those people, and it's a lot of fun. So
Well, I'm proud to know you and the team. I will let you get back to your evening. And I'm dead serious. When I come back next, we've got to do some fly fishing over there.
I know. Last time you were here, I was like, "Oh, you gotta teach me some fly fishing," because I loved it when I did it out in Idaho. It's just so, I don't know. There's just something about it. It's just so peaceful. So, but I guess when I fished out there, the wind was blowing pretty hard, so it was I was having a heck of a time at it. But I need more instructions. So I would love it when you come, that we can do. I've got two ponds full of fish.
Yeah, my pleasure. Consider it done.
Awesome. I can't wait. Can't wait, April. And thanks a
Well,
lot for doing the podcast and everything. I so much enjoy talking about, the knife my knife journey and everything. It's
Oh, I love it. You're like a ray of sunshine.
oh well, thanks, thanks.